Inside the Grand Cathedral in Atlanta, sunlight poured through stained glass windows, casting rainbow hues across polished marble floors. It was a picture-perfect wedding rows of guests, dressed in their finest, camera phones raised, violinists playing softly. At the altar stood Alana Monroe, breathtaking in a custom white gown, lace sleeves hugging her trembling arms. Her smile was rehearsed, her posture regal, but her eyes restless, searching told a different story. Across from her, Nathan Caldwell, the polished investment banker from a blue-blooded Southern family, beamed with pride. Behind them stood their parents, glowing with expectation, and the pastor, Bible in hand, preparing to pronounce a future built on power, legacy, and appearances. Yet, in the very last pew, nearly hidden behind the grandeur, sat a man in a rumpled shirt and scuffed shoes, Miles Carter. He didn't belong there, not among Atlanta's elite, but he was the only face. Alana seemed to see. Her chest rose and fell sharply. Her fingers twitched at her side. As the pastor asked the question everyone came to hear, "Do you take this man?" A cold silence settled. Alana's lips parted, voice barely a whisper. "I can't." Gasps erupted. Her mother collapsed onto a pew, catching the arm of a cousin. Nathan's expression crumbled from confusion to humiliation. Alana didn't explain. She didn't cry. She simply turned, lifted her gown, and walked past the altar, past the stairs, past her old life and straight toward the last pew. Miles, his eyes widened. He stood, as if unsure whether to run or stay. She reached him, nodded once, and together they disappeared through the church doors. Then, blackout. A new voice, older, steadier, filled the silence. Everyone said, "I was crazy to leave wealth for struggle, but today, I'm glad I did." 15 years had passed, but her voice still held that same quiet certainty, the kind that comes only after surviving everything that follows. Alana Monroe had spent most of her childhood in a house where silence was the only safe language. Her mother, Evelyn, ruled their immaculate Buckhead estate with an iron will and a sharpened tongue, measuring worth by pedigree, posture, and perfection. Every decision, what Alana wore, where she went to school, who she spoke to, was filtered through Evelyn's relentless pursuit of status. Her father, Henry Monroe, a well-dressed shadow of a man, watched it all with detached passivity, more present in the pages of his Wall Street Journal than in his daughter's life. Alana learned early to smile when she wanted to scream, to achieve, when she longed to rest, and to swallow her dreams in the name of reputation. It was at Howard University that she first tasted freedom. That's where she met Miles Carter, brilliant, kind, scrappy, a political science major with a scholarship, and 3 part-time jobs. He had the kind of fire that made you believe in things. They spent nights debating Baldwin and bell hooks, huddled in libraries and coffee shops, their connection as natural as breathing. But Miles, always conscious of the gap between his world and hers, never crossed that invisible line into something more. "You need someone who can keep up with you," he once said quietly. "Someone with more than just dreams." So when Nathan Caldwell entered the picture, confident, wealthy, polished, it felt like the path her mother would approve. He offered security, predictability, and prestige. Alana said yes with her mouth, even as her heart hesitated. 15 years later, the glitter of that life had long faded. Alana now lived in a small but sun-filled home in Charlotte, North Carolina, far from the designer walls of her past. The house was cluttered with school art projects, laundry baskets, and second-hand furniture that didn't match, but it pulsed with love. She and Miles had eventually found their way to each other after years of letters, chance encounters, and brave choices. Now married, they had built a life on shared values and open wounds. Miles taught English at the local high school, passionate about shaping young minds. Alana worked from home as a freelance writer, often weaving pieces about motherhood, memory, and healing. They weren't rich by any measure, but there was peace in their home, real, hard-earned peace. Their daughter, Leah, 12, had inherited Alana's eyes and Miles's introspective heart. She painted galaxies on cardboard scraps and wrote poetry in the margins of her notebooks. Eli, 9, was all energy and questions, always following his sister round with a kind of fierce loyalty that made Alana ache with gratitude. The four of them shared cramped dinners and weekend bike rides, slow mornings and movie nights. Then, one Friday afternoon, the letter arrived. It came in a thick cream envelope with her maiden name handwritten in elegant cursive: Alana Monroe, not Caldwell, not Carter. Inside was a message from a distant cousin. Her father, Henry, had passed away quietly in his sleep. The funeral would be held in Atlanta the following weekend. Her mother had specifically requested her presence and insisted she stay in the family mansion. Alana read the words twice, her throat tightening. It had been 12 years since she last stepped foot in that house. 12 years since her mother's voice had slammed through a phone call after the wedding that wasn't, calling her selfish, ungrateful, and disgraceful. 12 years of silence, distance, and healing. Now, the past was reaching for her again, her back toward the woman she used to be, the girl who had walked away from everything that glittered to choose something real. Driving back into Atlanta felt like stepping into a memory Alana had spent years trying to forget. The skyline loomed, elegant and cold, and the Monroe estate stood untouched by time, still pristine, still hollow. As the family's SUV pulled into the circular driveway, Leah and Eli pressed their faces to the window, wide-eyed at the mansion's sheer size. Inside, Evelyn Monroe greeted them with a stiff smile that barely reached her eyes. Her gaze flicked over Miles like he was dust on her designer rug. "Miles," she said coolly, with the precision of someone trying not to choke on the name. "Still teaching?" He nodded with grace, replying, "Still changing lives." Evelyn offered no response, already turning her attention to the children, whom she greeted with a formality reserved for strangers. Alana stood by quietly, her stomach tight, the walls already whispering reminders of who she used to be. The funeral the next morning was as grand and performative as Henry Monroe's life had been. The sanctuary was filled with silk, scent, and people more concerned with being seen than mourning. Alana sat stiffly in the front pew, flanked by her husband and children, her eyes dry, her emotions locked behind a dam she didn't dare open in public. She felt a presence before she saw him: Nathan Caldwell, tall and polished in a navy suit that probably cost more than a year's rent in Charlotte. He approached at the reception with that familiar self-assurance, hugging Alana like no time had passed. "You look comfortable," he said with a soft smirk, eyes flicking to Miles, whose handshake he accepted with barely restrained disdain. Nathan talked about his empire, his homes in Aspen and Miami, casually dropping names and numbers, his tone soaked in condescension. "Still writing?" he asked Alana, as if it were a charming hobby instead of a profession. "Must be fulfilling." The confrontation came like a crack in a mirror. They were standing near the fireplace in the Monroe living room, surrounded by murmuring guests, when Evelyn's voice cut through the air. "Look at your life," she said loudly, her wineglass trembling with anger. "You live in a shoebox and married a You could have had the world, Alana. You had it, and you threw it away," for she glanced at Miles with open disdain. The room went quiet. Alana's cheeks flushed, not from shame, but from rage. She opened her mouth to speak, to scream, to walk out all over again, but then she saw Leah watching from the corner, wide-eyed and uncertain, and something inside her shifted. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay still. "When is the reading of the will?" she asked, voice like steel. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. "Tomorrow morning," she replied. "Why?" Alana turned, taking Miles's hand in hers. Because I'm not leaving just yet. That night, after the house had gone quiet and the children were asleep in their borrowed rooms, Alana sat in the guest bed, shoulders tense. Miles leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes soft but honest. Why'd you still let them make you feel small? He asked gently. Alana stared at her hands, then out the window toward the dark stretch of garden below. Her voice came low, almost a whisper. Because I'm still trying to prove I made the right choice. Miles stepped forward and touched her shoulder, grounding her. She looked up, her eyes damp but defiant. For the first time in years, she realized she didn't need to run from the past. She needed to face it once and for all. The reading of the will took place in the Monroe study, a dark-paneled room lined with leather-bound books no one ever read. Alana sat between Miles and a distant cousin she barely recognized, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. Evelyn sat poised at the head of the long table, her expression unreadably, till the lawyer reached the part of the document that changed everything. Henry Monroe, in a final act of quiet defiance or redemption, had left 40% of the Monroe estate properties, stocks, assets to Alana. A full 40%. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she said nothing at first. Nathan, seated beside her like a polished ornament, looked up in mild surprise before his lips curled into something that resembled a smile. That's a lot of responsibility, he murmured to Alana afterward, guiding her gently toward the balcony as guests milled about. Let me help you manage it. The estate's complicated. You'll need someone who understands this world. His hand brushed her back as he spoke, warm and steady. There was a time she might have fallen for that tone. Not anymore, but the real storm came later that night, when Alana stepped into her childhood bedroom to find Evelyn sitting in the window. Chair, hands folded, waiting. Your father was always sentimental, Evelyn said flatly. That's what this is, sentiment. Alana didn't reply. Evelyn stood slowly, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her silk dress. You can claim your share, she said, voice sharp as glass. But not like this. Not with him. She turned to face her daughter fully. Don't waste that inheritance on poverty, on some tiny life. Divorce him. Come home. Start over. The words hung in the air like poison. What Evelyn didn't realize was that Miles, searching for Alana, had just paused outside the door, long enough to hear everything. After that, something changed in him. He didn't confront her outright, but the distance settled in gradually quiet. Dinners with no laughter, walks with no hand-holding, long silences where there used to be warmth. Alana felt it and didn't know how to fix it. She cornered him in the hallway one morning, her voice cracking. Talk to me, please. He looked at her for a long time before speaking. I've never been enough for them, he said softly. But I thought I was enough for you. The words struck deeper than any insult. She reached for him, but he stepped back. Not out of anger, out of exhaustion. Nathan, sensing the rift, moved in like smoke under a door. He called often, inviting her to upscale restaurants just to catch up, introducing her to developers and lawyers who spoke in confident, billion-dollar language. At dinner, he told her she had real instincts, said she could build something serious with her inheritance. He made it sound easy, seductive. She told herself it was harmless, that she was just listening. But every time she returned home, Miles looked a little more distant, and Leah had more questions in her eyes. Evelyn, meanwhile, hosted brunches and garden parties, as if nothing had changed, casually telling friends she'd come to her senses. She always had potential. She just married beneath her. In the quiet corners of her mind, Alana heard echoes of her youth Fallon standing in front of a mirror, telling her to skip dessert, boys like thin girls, or coldly folding up. A college acceptance letter to an art program. Creative writing. What will you do? Write fairy tales. Her mother's voice was a current she'd never truly escaped. one that kept pulling her back to a version of herself shaped by other people's expectations. Now, in the face of so many choices, Alana began to spiral. She stared at the ceilings of old rooms, wondering if she had thrown her future away out of rebellion. What if she had married Miles just to prove a point? What if the life they built was just the lesser option she convinced herself was nobler? What if her mother had been right all along that love wasn't enough? She didn't recognize herself anymore, torn between a legacy she never asked for and the fragile life she fought to create. And in the quiet of Evelyn's estate, surrounded by old ghosts and new doubts, Alana started to wonder if the right choice had ever been hers to begin with. It was nearly midnight when Alana wandered downstairs, unable to sleep, the weight of the past week pressing against her ribs. The house was quiet, cloaked in shadows, until she heard voices, low, urgent, coming from the study. She moved closer, heart pounding, and through the crack in the door, she saw them, Nathan and Evelyn, standing too close, whispering furiously. "She's emotional," Evelyn said sharply, her voice brittle with calculation. "She'll sign anything if you make her feel seen. Just get her to transfer it to you. We'll take care of the rest." Nathan's reply was calm, confident. "Trust me, she still wants to believe someone sees her. I just have to play the part a little longer." Alana stood frozen, blood rushing in her ears. In an instant, everything snapped into place: the dinner invitations, the charm, the business talk, the subtle digs. It had never been about her worth. It was about control, about reclaiming what they thought she stole when she walked away 15 years ago. She pushed the door open with a fury that made them both turn, startled. "So this was the plan," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "You manipulate me, charm me, bait me with some fantasy of power, and I'm supposed to hand over what my father left me." Nathan tried to speak, but she held up her hand. "Don't. I've heard enough lies in this house to last me a lifetime." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her mask finally slipping. "You're so naive, Alana. You were never meant to marry for love. You were meant to carry on this family name with pride, not shame, not with ... him." Her voice twisted the word like it was poison. That did it. Years of silence, of submission, of questioning her worth burst from Alana like a dam breaking. "You don't get to shame me for choosing peace," she spat, her voice rising. "You never knew what love looked like because you only married for position. You call it pride, but it's fear. You built a mansion on loneliness and called it success. I chose a home small, maybe, but full of love, and that terrifies you." Evelyn stood still, stunned, as Nathan looked away, guilt barely surfacing beneath the slick charm. Alana didn't wait for a reply. She turned, climbed the stairs, and gently woke Leah and Eli. Within minutes, they were in the car, driving through quiet Atlanta streets until they reached the modest hotel where Miles had checked into days earlier. After deciding he couldn't breathe under the same roof as Evelyn Monroe, she knocked softly on his door, the children clinging to her hands. When he opened it, groggy and surprised, her eyes welled with tears. She sank to her knees in front of the kids, looking up at the man she almost lost. "I need you to hear this," she whispered. "You were always enough. I was just afraid." "I wasn't." Miles stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around all three of them. In that hotel hallway, with nothing but honesty between them, Alana finally reclaimed the life she'd been fighting to protect. Not the estate, not the legacy, but the love she almost let go of trying to prove she deserved it. The morning after the confrontation, Alana sat in the hotel lobby with a pen in her hand and clarity in her chest. The chaos, the guilt, the ache of being torn between two worlds had finally settled into something simple: truth. She drafted a letter to the family attorney, her handwriting firm and unapologetic. "I, Alana Monroe Carter, formally rejects the inheritance tied to the Monroe estate. I will not accept any offer that comes with expectations, conditions, or shame. My worth was never in what I walked away from, but in what I chose to build. She folded the letter and sealed it with finality, knowing it would enrage Evelyn and confuse Nathan. But she no longer owed them understanding. What mattered now was what came next. Back in Charlotte, with Miles beside her and the kids laughing in the back seat. Life didn't magically get easier, but it felt real again. Alana poured herself into her writing, and one sleepless night, she published an essay titled "The Cost of Choosing Myself." In it, she laid bare the emotional toll of walking away from legacy, from expectations, from a life scripted for someone else. She wrote about choosing love over luxury, peace over performance, and the long, messy path of healing. The piece struck a nerve. Within days, it went viral, shared by writers, therapists, mothers, daughters. Women from all walks of life wrote to her, thanking her for giving voice to the quiet ache they carried. Inspired by the overwhelming response, Alana and Miles launched a small non-profit for underserved youth in their community, a creative writing center where kids could tell their stories, dream bigger, and know their voices mattered. They named it Henry's Desk, a tribute not just to her father, but to the complicated, silent man who, in his own way, had left a final blessing. Weeks after rejecting the inheritance, the lawyer sent Alana a private envelope with a note attached. This was meant for Miles. Inside was a handwritten letter from Henry, brittle with age, but inked with startling honesty. I watched you, Miles, quietly but closely. You gave my daughter what I never could: truth, softness, safety. You were the man I never had the courage to be. Tears streamed down Miles's face as he read it aloud in their kitchen. Alana's hand in his, their children listening in silence. It wasn't just a letter, it was healing, it was permission, and it was proof that sometimes the people who seem the weakest leave behind the strongest truths. A year later, the world looked different, but not because it had changed, because Alana had. Her viral essay, "The Cost of Choosing Myself," had been adapted into a short film by an independent director, screened at festivals, and lauded for its raw emotional truth. Invitations followed, but none as meaningful as the one from her alma mater, where she and Miles were asked to speak at a seminar on life choices, healing, and the courage to begin again. Sitting beside him in a packed auditorium, Alana felt the weight of her journey not as a burden, but as proof of how far she'd come. During the Q&A, a young woman with wide eyes and a notebook in her lap stood up, her voice timid but curious. "How did you know he was the one?" she asked, glancing at Miles. The room went quiet. Alana turned to her husband, their fingers already laced together, and smiled. "Because he loved me when I had nothing to offer," she said softly, "and stayed even when I had everything to lose." There was a hush, then applause, but Alana barely heard it. Her heart was full, her past at peace. As they exited the building hand in hand, the golden sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long, warm shadows behind them. No spotlight, no stage, just love, walking quietly into the life they built together, whole, steady, and finally free.